Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Wednesday night Bible study here at 39 West Avenue at Macedonia Church, where our pastor is Pastor Brandon Davis and the Macedonia family. We'd love to welcome you tonight. And this is another great lesson that we're in. And it's a beautiful night. I know it's storming and raining, but you find something good in all the weather, whether it's sunny or raining, whatever it is. We know it's God's day and we will rejoice and be glad in it. So here we are. We are still in talking about women of the Bible, and we have a great lesson ahead of us. So we are going to get in, and I am going to ask Sister Tanea to open us up with a word of prayer. Sister Tanea?
Oh, dear Heavenly Father, we thank you today for another day that you have blessed us with, God. We thank you for great mercies and we thank you for great grace. You have been with us and we are so grateful. Lord, we just ask tonight that your wisdom be upon the teacher, Lord. Open up the depths of Esther to us, Father, that we may understand what people in the Bible full of integrity look like, that we may model their example. Oh, Lord of glory, we just are so grateful that we're able to learn together. You said that we're better together, and we thank you for the unity as we come together to learn your word. We just thank you so much. We ask that you just bless us and help us to receive everything that we're taught today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Sister Tanea. That's awesome. We are definitely better together. I like that. Sounds like a food commercial, better together. Oh, yeah, I think there was something that said better with cheddar, right? But I like that from our Pastor B's message on Sunday. We are better together. So before I start, I want to give a shout out. I'm going to be doing a little different here. I'm going to be looking at people's names today as we're going back and forth. So I just want to check and see. And I thought, okay, there he is. Okay. So I want to give a big shout out to Elder Albert Ray Dancy. Today is his birthday. So everyone raise your hand and say happy birthday to Elder Dancy. Yay, yay.
Happy
Happy
birthday,
birthday, Elder
Elder
Dancy.
Dance.
We love you, Elder Dancy. Just know that Macedonia loves you very much. We're praying for you every day. And we know you have victory. We know you have victory. And we can't wait for the victory report to come back. And just wanted to really wish you a happy birthday. So glad you're still with us. You're with us in our hearts and our minds, but, you're still here with us, Elder Dancy. You got a lot to still give. We need you. You have a lot to pour into us still. Okay. Does anyone want to say anything? I still see hands going up. Is that something someone wants to say? Or are we still just thanking God for Elder Dancy? Sister Mary, did you want to say something? Or okay, maybe not. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about Esther's bold faith. And this is like one of those cliffhangers that's going to kind of leave us on a dun 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 where we end today, and then where we pick up for next week's lesson. So we kind of have to, I can't go into that area. We have to stop, because I know everyone knows the story, but for those that don't, and then we don't want to take away from next week's lesson where they put in all the time to study and research, and then, we already covered it. So it's going to be a bold stop to where we have to end at chapter 4, verse 16. So before we start, me, gotta do my thing. And we are going to do a few more selfies. So everyone ready? We're going to do a few more, and you got to tell me, who am I? And again, these are selfies from people from the Bible, that they would take a selfie of what their situation was at the time. So you can tell me who the person is and anything you'd want to share about it. It's up to you. Sister Myra, I saw your hand first.
I think that is Moses with the burning bush.
Yes. Yes. I think these are so cute. I think they're really creative, for them to come up and maybe even somebody who sees it on the internet, they might actually want to go ahead and read the story of Moses and the burning bush. It's really cute, I thought. Okay, here's another one. Ready? Who knows who this is? Sister Alma.
I think those are the disciples in
Yep.
Jesus.
Yep, Jesus and the disciples. Okay, this one might be a little tricky, but let's see who can get this one. Took me a minute. Sister Gail.
Is that Benjamin when they went to Egypt?
Say that again. Was it who?
Benjamin when they went to Egypt.
No.
Oh, okay.
No. Anyone else have a guess at this? Elder Stanrod.
Is it John, the young disciple at the feast, I guess, of the Passover?
Okay, so now you guys are really getting me, but I think that's not it. We'll go to Sister Amanda Davis.
I feel like it could be Daniel because he's eating all those vegetables.
Figures you would get that one, right? Yes, that's what it is. It's Daniel and his veggies. And we know the story how he went on a Daniel's fast. So yes, it is Daniel and his veggies. But the other guesses were good as well. Had me wondering too. Okay, here's another one. This one might be a little tricky too. Who do you think this is? Oh, wow. Sister Titi.
Is it the son that returned home because he was poor with the pig, swine, and all that? I could be totally wrong, but yeah.
Yep. And what do we call him? What kind of son, Sister Gail?
The prodigal son.
The prodigal.
Sorry.
The prodigal son. Yep, that's the prodigal son. That's a good one. All right. And who can tell me who this is? Brother John. Brother John, unmute. Just hit the little microphone button on your phone. You unmute. No? Okay, Sister Titi, who is this?
Is this Noah in the ark?
Yep, Noah's gathering all his animals together. All right, John, work out that mute button, and I want you to chime in again later, and we're gonna, hear from you tonight. Okay, so we're still in our summer quarter, and we're talking about women in the Bible. So as we touched last week, we went through the first 6 lessons, and the women it talked about was Eve, Deborah, Ruth, and last week was Hannah, which we know how Hannah, she committed her son to God, Samuel, and her son Samuel to God rather, and how she was a praying woman and where that got her. So this week we're talking about Esther and her bold faith. And through Esther, God once again gave Israel victory over their enemies. So we are talking about Esther and what she did. And the lesson jumps around a lot, different verses. But if you did the related scriptures, basically you're going to read Esther 1 through 4. But because of the questions and where they come from, we'll basically stick to the book. So you don't have to feel like, oh, I didn't read that or I didn't see that. So I'll stick with the questions in the book and referring to the scriptures that pertain to those. So we're going to watch a little brief video. So if you didn't have a chance to study the lesson or do anything, this video will basically give you the answers and a good background of where we are tonight in the book of Esther. Okay, here we go.
The Book of Esther. It's one of the more exciting and curious books in the Bible. The story is set over 100 years after the Babylonian exile of the Israelites from their land. And while some Jews did return to Jerusalem, remember Ezra and Nehemiah, many did not. And so the Book of Esther is about a Jewish community living in Susa, the capital city of the ancient Persian Empire. The main characters in this story are two Jews, Mordecai and then his niece Esther. And then there's the king of Persia, who's something of a drunken pushover in this story. And then there's the Persian official Haman, the cunning villain. Now, this is a curious book in the Bible, mainly for the fact that God is never even mentioned, not once, which might strike you as kind of odd. I mean, isn't the Bible about God? But this is a brilliant technique by the author, who's anonymous, by the way. It's an invitation to read this story looking for God's activity, and there are signs of it everywhere. The story is full of very odd, quote, coincidences and ironic reversals, and it all forces you to see God's purpose at work, but behind the scenes. Let's just dive into the story. The book opens with the king of Persia throwing two elaborate banquet feasts that last a total of 187 days, and it's all for the grandiose purpose of displaying his greatness and splendor. On the last day of the banquet feast, he's really drunk, and he demands that his wife, Queen Vashti, appear at the party to show off her beauty. She refuses, and so in a drunken rage, the king deposes Vashti and makes the silly decree that all Persian men should now be the masters of their own homes. Then he holds a beauty pageant because he wants to find a new queen. This is like a really bad soap opera. But it's right here that we're introduced to Esther and Mordecai. Esther hides her Jewish identity and enters the beauty pageant and wins. And the king is so obsessed with Esther that he elevates her to become the new queen of Persia. Now, after this, and even more serendipitous, is the fact that Mordecai just happens to overhear two royal guards plotting to murder the king. And so he informs Esther, who in turn informs the king, and Mordecai gets credit for saving the king's life. Now, right here from the beginning, God's not mentioned anywhere, but this all seems providentially ordered. What is it that God's up to? You have to keep reading. We're next introduced to Haman, who's not actually a Persian. He's called an Agagite. He's a descendant of the ancient Canaanites. Remember 1 Samuel chapter 15. The king elevates Haman to the highest position in the kingdom, and he demands that everybody kneel before Haman. Well, when Mordecai sees Haman, he refuses to kneel, which of course fills Haman with rage. And when he finds out that Mordecai's Jewish, Haman successfully persuades the king to enact this crazy decree to destroy all of the Jewish people. And to decide the date of the Jews' annihilation, Haman rolls the dice. A die is called pur in Hebrew. Tuck that away for later. 11 months later, on the 13th of Adar, all the Jews will die. Haman and the king then have a drinking banquet to celebrate their really horrible decision. So the focus now turns to Mordecai and Esther, who are the only hope for the Jewish people. They make a plan that Esther's going to reveal her Jewish identity to the king and ask him to reverse the decree. But approaching the king without a royal request is, according to Persian law, an act worthy of death. So in a key statement, Mordecai, he's confident that even if Esther remains silent, that deliverance for the Jews will arrive from another place. And then Mordecai wonders aloud. He says, who knows? Maybe you've become queen for this very moment. Esther responds with bravery, and she purposes to go to the king with her amazing words, if I perish, I perish. Now, in what unfolds, we watch the ironic reversal.
Okay, so that is basically chapters 1 to 4 in a nutshell. So if we didn't really get to read all those, that's basically the story of Esther and where we are today in Esther chapter 3. So I'd usually like to ask a life application question. And last week with Hannah, I asked a question. And this week, these are questions that I feel like when I study it, God really like puts it on me to ask myself. So I really felt like God was telling me last night, like, how far would I let my faith take me? How far will I let faith take me? My faith in God. What am I willing to do? So as we read the story of Esther, it's all about faith and how we believe in something, and how are we willing to stand on what we believe? So I pose that question to everyone as well. How far will you let faith take you? So we're going to read the lesson text, and we're going to read it in the New Living Translation. And I'm going to ask Sister Myra to come on and read this for us, please.
Yes, good evening, saints. All the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect whenever he passed by, for so the king had commanded. But Mordecai refused to bow down or show him respect. Then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. He had learned of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Mordecai told him the whole story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay unto the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai gave Hatak a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all Jews. He asked Hatak to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hatak to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So Hatak returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Then Esther told Hatak to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his golden scepter. And the king has not called me to come to him for 30 days. So Hatak gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. But you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. Sorry. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go to see the king. If I must die, I must die. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word.
Amen. So even reading it in the New Living, it kind of makes it sound like a real juicy, like hot topic novel. So a lot of back and forth with Mordecai and Esther, and using Hatak going back and forth. And so it's a lot in there, and you see how we have to leave it. So we leave it on a cliffhanger. If I must die, I must die. So you have to wait till next week's lesson and to find out what happens. But it's just definitely a great lesson to read, and it does challenge our faith. And like Mordecai said, if he believed that even if it wasn't going to be Esther, that God would definitely look out for his people. You know, the Jewish people are his chosen people. Does anyone want to say anything before we go any further? I definitely don't want to do all the talking. I'd love to hear your points and what everyone has to share. So we're going to go into a little breakdown. So feel free to raise your hand at any time. So the purpose of the book of Esther was to demonstrate God's sovereignty and his loving care for his people. But as we've heard through the video and through your studies, God was not mentioned at all in the Bible, but it does talk about his providence. And looking up the word providence, it basically just means God's protection. I know we've heard that in our lessons in the past, but providence just means the protection of God. So the author of the book is an unknown author. A lot of speculations, Ezra, or this one or that one, but I don't think that's really, a point to ponder, so to speak. So the setting of the story is in the Persian Empire, and most of the action takes place in the king's palace in Shushan, which is the capital. So I like how that's broken down that way. It said most of the action. So we know we're in the palace, and we know we're talking about the king and Esther and how she has to go into him and make a request. So the key people are Esther, Mordecai, King Ahasuerus, and Haman. So the special features of this book is Esther is one of only 2 books named after women in the Bible. Ruth is the other one. The book is unusual in that in the original version, no name, title, or pronoun for God appears in it, but God's presence is clear throughout the book. So I'm going to ask here, did anyone want to add anything about Esther, our key people, Mordecai, the king, or Haman? You can come on and give anything you'd want to discuss with them. It doesn't matter if it brings us further in the lesson, but anything you've done in your studies on any of the key people that you'd like to come on and share with us. Sister Alma.
Well, I know that Esther's name means star, and it could also goes along with like one of the goddesses, the Babylonian goddess of love, which is the star of Ishtar.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Sister Angela McFarland.
Okay, and also with Esther, her means hidden. I don't know if she said that because somebody's. And also Hadassah, her real name means myrtle, and she's from the smallest tribe of Benjamin, and she is actually Mordecai's cousin, but he raised her as his daughter.
Okay. Awesome. Sister Kawana.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, piggybacking off of that last point, that I think it was presumed that her parents were dead, so that's why Mordecai kind of had that close relationship with her, because he raised her like a daughter.
Yep. That was probably like, adoption back in the day. And actually, I think I heard that today was National Adoption Day. So this is, Mordecai basically adopted her as his own. Any other points on Esther that anyone researched or looked up? Okay, so what about Mordecai? I know we just said a couple things, but what can we learn what do we know about Mordecai? Any points about Mordecai that anyone looked up? So I know they said that in Esther 2, it talks about Mordecai sat at the king's gate. And this position indicates that he was associated with decision makers and men of influence in the kingdom. So if we keep that in mind, then we'll understand the story why he went back and forth with Esther on what he knew behind the scenes. He must have known something as being, one of the decision makers. Mother Millie.
Anna, I love the way Mordecai didn't bow down to anyone but the Lord.
Yep, I love that too. That's where we talk about our faith, Sister Angela McFarland.
Yes, Mordecai prevented the plot that Haman had against the Jewish people, and that ended up being him. King Ahasuerus promoted him to like the second, which was like a prime minister.
Right. Yep. Anyone else have anything else on Mordecai? Okay, let's move on to King Ahasuerus. I listened to the pronunciation many times, and that's what they say, Ahasuerus, but I'll probably mess it up as we go on. So anything about the king that anyone wanted to add in that they wanted to? So I know from the studies, okay, Sister Merle.
I think he was one of the kings that in the Jews being taken into Babylon, he was one of those 3 kings, Cyrus, Darius, and however you pronounce his name. He's one of the 3 kings that was instrumental in rebuilding the temple. Mm-hmm. So I think I thought that was an important point about him.
Yeah, and I think they also, his name is also Xerxes the First. So I think they, go back and forth with that. I didn't do too much study into the background, but I did read that about the temple. But I do want, if anyone did have any other points or background information, I'd love to hear it. So I know Sister Mary.
He was over 127 provinces, and at this time, I believe Persia was one of the biggest empires in the world. So he was very powerful.
Hmm. Yep. Sister Angel.
Another thing about King Xerxes or Ahasuerus, he was like he thought he himself as like God. He was which was why I love the Esther story. He like, you know, he because he ruled so much, like the movie 300, he was like, I mean, that was King Xerxes, but I believe a different King Xerxes. I believe that was King Xerxes the second, but he thought that he was God and that you couldn't touch him. And so to me, the love story between how he fell in love with Esther is to me beautiful, because he just was wicked in his heart, in the sense that he thought he was God and would just, you know, anybody that got in his way, he would destroy.
Right. Yeah, and he did. I did have that point that no one would dare defy him. And Sister Angel, I wondered the same thing about the movie 300 with Xerxes. I was wondering if it was the same one or a different one, but then I didn't really look back into the movie, but I was like, oh, I wonder, because that was a pretty creepy role that he played in there. So I was trying to think, you know, could that have been him or not? And it was he depicted in the right light? I'm not sure. But yeah, he did. He had a lot of people he ruled over, a lot of area he was in charge of. Brother Curtis.
Yeah, it also takes place where the Jews who did not want to come back, go back to Jerusalem, and those that remained under Babylon, that's where it took place.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. Mother Millie.
I like also she's not mentioned in this chapter, but Queen Vashti, she was like in a woman's lib thing. That was way back. And that was the providence of God to get her out the way to bring Esther in.
Yep. Yep. You're absolutely right. Yeah, she wasn't mentioned as one of the key people, but if it wasn't for her getting the boot, you know. Let's see. Sister Bernie.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Brother Curtis said, because Esther is the only book that really highlights what was going on in Persia after the Babylonian captivity,
Mm-hmm.
and only a small portion went back home to Jerusalem, but the majority of the Jews stayed in Persia. So this book highlights their life in Persia. It was
Yep.
only I read somewhere it was only like 50,000 went back to Jerusalem when they were finally free to return.
Wow. Yeah, that's something. Now, we also have anyone else have anything on the king, or we can move on to Haman. Sister Shirley and then Sister Merle.
It was saying here that he ruled a vast empire. He was very wealthy. He's sensual and always giving feasts. He was cruel and acutely lacking in foresight. That's what it says here.
Yep, that sums it up. Definitely the king Ahasuerus. Okay, now we're gonna move on to Haman. Oh, Sister Merle, did you want to add anything else?
I was just gonna say, I think I was reading something this week about Vashti, and I know that that it was the will of the Lord that she got booted out, but the fact that she was not willing to allow the king at that point in his drunken state to just make an open display of her, even though she was beautiful, speaks of her modesty as well. And I was reading that she wouldn't do it because of the fact that she was modest and how she cared about herself, and having been in this feast for this long period of time, all of a sudden now he wants to bring her out. So we know that it was the will of the Lord, but it also says something about her character as a woman in that time to take that stance, and that's why she didn't want him just to be able to flaunt her in that way in his drunken state.
Yeah, and that's exactly like what Mother Millie said about being like an early women's lib. Like she didn't want to be, you know, paraded around like that. You know, you're right. It does say a lot about her character. And we talk about Esther's character a lot, but then, like you said, they don't really mention Vashti's character. So that is a big part of it as well. Sister Bernie.
And just to add to what Sister Merle said, I think in chapter 1, it talked about he had like 2 feasts. There was like 187 days. The first one was 180 days. That's 6 months. So he went on this drunkenness for over 6 months. And just to display her like that, she didn't want that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Haman. Anyone? Was Haman a good guy, bad guy? What do you take from his character? He was they call him the antagonist in the story. So what do we think about that? Sister Angela McFarland.
Haman was a bad guy. He plotted to kill the Jews. He was hung on his own gallows that he thought Mordecai was going to be hung on. He's a descendant of the Amalekites, and he was an Agag, and he was a villain. He was also the prime minister to the king. And when he done away with, then Mordecai took that position. And they said that his name meant noise or confused. And it was a lot of that going on during that time.
Yep. Very good. Sister Amanda Davis.
Also, he was extremely arrogant and he thought he was better than everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yep. He definitely did. I did read a quote on him that I forgot to write separately, but I gotta find it. I think it's in my notes as we move in. Oh, here it is. Here it is. I thought this quote was great. It came from, I don't know if it's in the regular book, but it was in the teacher's book. And describes Haman. It said, the most arrogant people are often those who must measure their self-worth by the power or influence they think they have over others. So I thought that was a pretty powerful quote talking about arrogant, as you said, Sister Amanda. Sister Alma and then Sister Nikki.
I thought it was funny because he said he wanted to lay hands on Mordecai physically, but he knew he couldn't do that. So then he plotted to go through the king.
Yep. And I think that's funny, Sister Alma, when I kept reading lay hands, I don't ever remember reading that phrase in the Bible, but I think a lot of our young people take that phrase nowadays, going to lay hands on someone. So meaning fight. Sister Nikki and then Sister Angel.
I was just going to add that comment that you made that was in the book for the students. And then also the arrogance, as Pastor Brandon preached on this Sunday, that all stems from pride. So if you don't have an ability to control, some people kind of identify their self-worth as having power, and if they don't have that power, then it stems from arrogance, as you had stated, and then also it's rooted in pride.
Wow. Yes. Sister Angel.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is it okay? Can I make a comment about Queen Vashti first? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Anyone can comment. Whatever you come up with, I'd love to hear it.
Okay, and so please forgive me because I'm not trying to cause like any confusion, but I kind of saw it a little differently with Queen Vashti. And I do understand if I would not want to be paraded, in front of a bunch of drunk men. But the way I looked at it was that as a position of queen, right? That's, even though she's queen, it's a certain position, and there's certain things that you have to do as queen. It's not her position to question, it's her position to obey. And I looked at it as more prideful that she didn't go before. Like, there are some scholars that say it was because she didn't agree with his politics and all of that. So I don't know, but I looked at it as a queen, they had to learn for a year before they could even be presented before the queen. She had to be schooled on her position as queen and what she could do and what she couldn't do. So I do understand her not wanting to do it. But if you are put in that, how do you say, the whatchamacallit as queen, like, I could be so wrong. Like, I'm not, maybe she knew she was going to be banished and wanted, maybe she was sick of the title and sick of all of that, which is fine. But I looked at it more like, if you're in a position and you know what your duties are, and unfortunately back then women didn't have the rights that we have now, and but I looked at it more as a prideful thing, and I could be wrong, so don't attack me, and I'm willing to accept whatever anybody else says, but that's just how I always saw it.
Yeah, I believe like what you're saying is that she knew what she was going to get into, and of course it doesn't break down exactly her reason. What I had read as well is that, I think Sister Bernie said it about parading around in front of all the men, and it put her in a difficult situation, but we don't know. So it is okay to, figure that out. And as far as, I would never say answers are right or wrong unless I really knew. But a lot of times the Bible and reading the scriptures, you apply it to your life. It's a life application. If you were in Vashti's position, what would you do? Then it's a lot of layers to undo. Well, like you said, if you knew for a year you had to go through this training of how to be a queen, then you knew what was going to happen. How would you put yourself in that position? So it's all about life application as well. Sister Nikki, did you want to share something else?
No, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's no problem. Elder Leroy.
Yeah, not to keep going over this point, but like way back before we were saved, loving the Lord, even women and guys are the same thing. To get your boldness, you will have a drink. So, when you drink, you do stupid things. So I think like Vashti was sober, and the request that the king asked for, I don't think that was a normal request. That was motivated by drunken state. So the lady now, in her soberness of mind, said, "Wait a minute, this is ridiculous. This is not part of, my duty." And I think, like this sort of modesty and the natural shamefacedness that a woman would have, because you made the cover up. So, and every woman, whatever, they always try to cover on whatever, decent people. So I think she just didn't feel like doing that, because that was not really something that's normal. So I think that's why she reacted the way she did, as well as Sister Merle said, God was in the whole thing. So God maybe put upon her this desire to want to be modest, and I was saying, I'm not going to do this. All of a sudden, maybe the fear of God hit her. Woman cover up, and I should feel that maybe more than ever. So she said, wait a minute, this is not right. So I think because of that, no, she reacted the way she did.
Wow, I love these points, Sister Angel and Elder Leroy. I really like that, both sides of the spectrum. And also, Elder Leroy saying that about a drunken state, that's I never even thought of that. That's really powerful to say, because it was, it was 6 months of drunkenness. So maybe he took it, a little too far. But that is, and I never thought of that. I like those points. Okay, so before we move on to getting into the book of Esther, does anyone want to share anything else before we move on? At any point, anytime you think of anything, we have to go backwards, forwards, please raise your hand. This is what we're here for. We're to share together, and we learn together. Sister Myra.
Not to say everything that everybody else said, but I agree with Sister Angel and Elder Stanrod, because I'm like, just because she didn't come, there were people that were serving and giving them the drinks and doing all of that. So I'm sure that those echoes of what was going on in that hall returned to Vashti. And she knew what was going on in there. She knew that they were just drinking and having all of these, whatever they were doing for like Sister Bernadette said, 6 months. Like, who has a party for 6 months? Mm-hmm. So I think she just knew that, no, I'm not coming in there with all of the men, and there's no women, there's just men. So all eyes are going to be on me walking into you.
Yeah, that has to be intimidating and a scary situation. Definitely. So we're going to talk about our little drama, power, romance, and intrigue. That's the book of Esther. The writer of Esther shows the profound give and take of God's sovereignty and human will. The book of Esther begins with Queen Vashti refusing to obey an order from her husband, King Xerxes. She is subsequently banished, and the search begins for a new queen. The king sends out a decree to gather together all of the beautiful women in the empire and bring them into the royal harem. Esther, a young Jewish woman, is one of those chosen to be in the royal harem. King Xerxes is so pleased with Esther that he makes her his queen. Meanwhile, Mordecai, Esther's older cousin, becomes a government official and during his tenure foils an assassination plot. But the ambitious and self-serving Haman is appointed by Prime Minister second in command in the empire. He's appointed prime minister. I'm not sure if I said that right. Second in command to the empire. When Mordecai refuses to bow down in reverence to him, Haman becomes furious and determines to destroy Mordecai and all the Jews along with him. To accomplish his vengeful deed, Haman deceives the king and persuades him to issue an edict condemning the Jews to death. Mordecai tells Queen Esther about this edict, and she determines to risk her life to save her people. So this is our lesson in a nutshell. And it definitely, back in the day, I know there used to be All My Children, One Life to Live, General Hospital. So this is definitely up there with one of those stories, and it has it all in it, and the back and forth, and deliver this message and bring this message back. So, but in all of it, it's talking about what would our faith, how far do we let our faith take us? Would we stand up in these situations and risk our lives for a whole generation, for all of our people, even for our family? Would we put ourselves out there for our family? And as we get in further, you know, there's some strong questions that we really have to ask ourselves. So we'll briefly go through Esther's resume. Her strengths and accomplishments was she was beautiful and her character won the heart of the king. She combined courage with careful planning. She didn't just jump right into this, as we'll see. She carefully planned this. She was open to advice and willing to act. So Esther was teachable. She was more concerned for others than her own security. And then we can learn from her life that serving God often demands that we risk our own security. And God has a purpose for the situations in which he places us in. And we can learn from her courage. We can learn courage, while often vital, does not replace careful planning. So again, with that, like, she didn't just act. Sometimes some of us can be very reactive before we think through things, even with, you know, responding with our mouth. Sometimes we got to just step back and say, okay, we have courage, but let's just think this through for a minute. And of course, her key verse is, so I will go unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. And I know we're going to touch on this, but why wasn't it acceptable to go into the king? Why is she saying, if I perish, I perish? Why wouldn't the queen be able to go into the king? Sister Alma.
You couldn't just go, say, knock on his door. You had to be summoned to come and see him.
Exactly. Sister Cherie, did you want to add anything to that or any other point?
No, she said it. That's good.
She said it. Okay, Sister Gail.
A lot of times the king was always in his court doing business and all, and different things that were going on. So you just can't go and show up in there, just like in a court today. You can't just go and show up and start talking. You have to have an appointment. So that's what I think.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's a definitely putting in that perspective. You know, being married to a judge, you can't all of a sudden want to go in there and start talking to him in the middle of a session of court. So looking at Esther's Sister Angel.
I also wanted to say, because she, yeah, that was totally illegal for her to go in there. But also, I think, too, he hadn't called her for 30 days, and we don't know why, what the reason was. But that had to be terrifying. You know, when you first get married, you're in love and all that kind of stuff. And then that joker don't call you for 30 days. You're like, oh, did I do something wrong? You know, whatever. So she had all those things, you know, going on.
Yeah, you're right. You're definitely right. Sister Merle, I saw your hand. Did you want to share anything?
And I was just going to say that, and I believe it was with this one that even then when you presented yourself, if he didn't hold out his scepter, that meant death. So it was like she was going to take the chance that if I go in, how is he going to receive me?
Yeah. Elder Leroy.
I think it also showed the kind of relationship they have. It was more like an arranged kind of thing because, I'm sure you have other women and, you look at them as numbers. So if he was really, really in love with her, even if he enter into the court on summons, his love would override wrath and he would just hold it out, and then he probably say, you're not supposed to bother me. I'm in the meeting. You know what I mean? Because sometimes wives, you love, husband, you love your wife. And sometimes, they maybe, aggravate you a little bit, but because you love, you won't deal with them in wrath. So it shows that the kind of relationship they have, almost like a state's figurehead kind of thing, because you didn't call it for 30 days. When you love somebody, you're going to call them more than 30 days. So it let me know the kind of relationship they have also, like a figurehead kind of thing, a position, but not really in love like you were with your husband or, some of us are with our wives, vice versa.
Right. That's an excellent point. Sister Bernadette?
I just wanted to bring out the point that before Esther was chosen, there were other women that came before the king, and no doubt, he had relations with all those other women. So once back in those days, they became concubines. So even though Esther now was his queen, was his main girl, if you will, those other women were his concubines. So at any given time, no doubt, he would have relations with those other women. So that's why, too, maybe, he was going around in his cycle. You know how Solomon had 1,000 women. So just like that, they had to go, they were going around in cycles, I'm assuming.
No, I think I think I read that as well. Oh, because they said it was a harem. So they said that, the king had his harem, and then sending out the decree, everyone came over wanting to be part of that harem. So yes, I believe it was a lot of women and he had his hands full. And one is enough, but can you imagine more than one? Sister Gail.
I'll pass on that. I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so we're going to break down the lesson here. We're going to talk about Esther in Esther 3, right in the beginning there. It talks about an evil plan. It talks about the evil plan that Haman had and how Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman. And then the dangerous plan is Esther risks her life by coming before the king. And then a godly plan where Esther and Mordecai believed that God would deliver his people. As when we watched in the video, it talked about, delivering his people. Mordecai believed that by any means necessary, God was going to deliver them. Okay, so let's go to question 1 in your book. And how is Esther both a historical account and a great literature? Sister Gail.
The lesson brings out that a great literature, and it really was a historical account. It really happened, the book says. And the literature part was that when you put a story together, like we were talking about the soap operas and stuff, it always includes the characters. Some are in some kind of conflict, the main characters, the antagonist, the hero, and the heroine. And everything, and it also has a climax and a resolution. So everything that they talked about right here made it a literature, because all of that was included in Esther.
Wow, took us back to English class for that. Sister Alma.
When you're talking about English class, this reminded me, as being a teacher, that when we have the students retell a story, that they had to include all of those elements also.
Yeah, and that's really important. We didn't have that when we were going to school, but I noticed, like, as when the kids were going through school, like this generation, you have the retell, and that's very important. So to be able to go through something and know what you just read and be able to, figure out why, who's the main character and such. It definitely means a lot. So from this verse here, I'm going to read 2 and 3. It says, all the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect whenever he passed by. For so the king had commanded. But Mordecai, he refused to bow down or show him respect. Then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why are you disobeying the king's command? So was it really a king's command? What do we think about that? That's just a question on the fly. Do we think that's a king's command? Did the king command that everyone bow down to Haman? Sister Vicky.
Honestly, like looking at the character of this king, I don't know why he would want anyone to bow down to anyone else but him. So I kind of think that might have just been someone maybe just trying to get Mordecai caught.
Okay. Sister Gail.
Oh, it says in Esther 3 and 2 that all the king's servants that when the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. So apparently the king did tell them, I guess. That's what the scripture brings out.
Yeah, I was a little, not to get hung up on that, but I was a little confused as well, because I believe the king putting Haman in that position, it would make him to be reverenced, but he would expect everyone to reverence him. But it doesn't really actually say that the king said, bow before Haman. So it was a little tricky on that one. But basically, I think Vicky said it, Haman just wanted to be relevant and he wanted to be, bowed down to. But then seeing how Mordecai disobeyed the king's command, what conclusion can we make about Mordecai's character? What can we say about Mordecai's character about not bowing down to Haman? Sister Merle.
Well, one thing, he was definitely a leader and not a follower. It shows his godly character because basically, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not bow before any graven images. And even though it wasn't an image, this persona that Mordecai was presenting was like this thing that he wanted people to he wanted people to lift him up. And Mordecai, because of his belief in God, wasn't going to do that. And it was like, even though everyone around him was doing it, all the other leaders, all the other people that were around Mordecai was doing it, Mordecai was like, in his heart, he didn't feel to do it, and he did not do it.
Right. Elder Stanrod?
Yeah, I agree with Sister Merle. Mordecai, he had conviction, and sometimes with the Queen or King of England, and people go before them and they do, I guess they call it the curtsy, where you kind of bow a little bit. But that kind of bow is not to worship; it's kind of like reverence and honor them for the position. But this particular case, it's like worship. This man wanted, and Mordecai said, "No, I'm not going to worship you." So that's why he refused to bow.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, so I mean, he didn't want to bow to him. Sister Alma?
Well, read that he considered himself a demigod and that he was fabulously wealthy, and he only saw the king that was above him. He didn't want anyone else even on his level.
Absolutely. Sister Sheree?
We also see that Mordecai truly believed in his God. He was faithful to his God. We also see that he was willing to risk his life for his God. So he had tremendous trust and faith in his religion. He wasn't one that wavered. Sometimes your faith gets tested when they say your back is up against the wall, but he was so much involved in his religious belief and what he stood for that he was willing to even sacrifice life. So he was really dedicated to his Jewish beliefs.
Yes, and that's why I said this really brought out faith to me. Like, how far will we let our faith take us? That's exactly what I gathered from this. Sister Titi?
I was originally going to say his faith as well, but then that was what I was thinking. But as I read in the lesson too, it said he might have viewed it as a disloyalty to God to bow down to a foreign dignitary.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Sister Merle.
I was gonna, as Sister Cherie was talking, I started thinking about like that, kind of like the Hebrew boys. It was almost like this Mordecai was taking this position. I'm not gonna do it, and he was really taking a position like Esther. If I perish, I perish. But because he just believed so strongly that this man was just a mere man, and he probably knew the background of Haman and what his personality was like, all of that we don't know because scripture doesn't break all of that out. But he was probably in his heart just purposing, I'm not going to bow to him. And it was like the stance that he was taking is really like, I as Sister Cherie was talking, I was thinking it was that same stance that the Hebrew boys did. And, my God is going to stand up for me. And we see that as it moves on in this lesson, he really had a solid rock faith in God and a belief in God.
Yep. And even though they don't mention God, we know that's who he had his faith in. Sister Bernie?
Sister Anna, I saw something in this lesson that I'd never seen before. In chapter 3, it was talking about Haman's servants and how they were the ones who noticed that the Mordecai wouldn't bow, and because Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. And I had never seen this before. They brought the matter to Haman. And I thought about the scripture in Proverbs, these things, 6 things the Lord hate. And one is he that brings discord to his brethren. And I was like, oh my goodness. They the servants were the one that initiated this thing with Haman. And look how the matter turned out. So I was just saying, as a life application, that so careful. We have to be so careful not to bring discord and point out things that some people haven't even noticed. Mordecai was one of the numbers. Haman probably didn't even notice him, but they brought the matter to Haman, and look what happened.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even think of it that way. And like we said, it's like a soap opera, and it's a bunch of men talking, nothing worse than men talking, right, Sister Bernie? Brother Curtis.
Yeah, you can see historically speaking, you go back to Saul, and God told Saul to kill all the Amalekites. Haman's ancestors were ancient enemies of the Jews. Israel had been commanded by God to destroy the Amalekites and erase them from their memory under the sun. And Saul didn't do it. So here we have the enemies of the Jews cropping up again.
Yep, you're right. So being disobedient, you're right. So we're going to move on to questions 2 through 4. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. He had learned of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So how do we see God's providence at work in the promotion of Haman? Question number 2 in your book. How do we see God's providence? How do we see God's protection at work in the promotion of Haman? So Haman being in power, how do we see God at work? Sister Nikki.
Sister Annalisa, Esther is my absolute favorite book in the Bible. I have got to share. Okay. So the question, the answer to your question, it says, since God is the one who ultimately controls the hearts of kings, and it gives Proverbs 21:1, we recognize that Haman was elevated to his position, not just by King Ahasuerus. I probably didn't say that correctly, but by God himself. And then the scripture that supports it, it says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, as the river of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will. And Sister Annalisa, it's no coincidence that it's Elder Danzy's birthday today. I could remember Elder Danzy praying the proclamation when I had taught on Esther during COVID. And it's so important that he is much like Mordecai. He has not bowed to his circumstance. And God doesn't want either of us to bow. When I taught this, Annalisa, I'll be really quick. What the enemy wanted, like Haman, is for us to bow to circumstances of hardships, troubled marriages, children abandoning the family, terrifying news from doctors, persecution, sadness, and hurt that's targeted to create depression, anxiety, and discouragement. All the works of the flesh, adultery, fornication, jealousy, anger, all the works, but most of all, fear. But I want you to know we have the victory. And Elder Dancy, keep on praying and preaching that proclamation. I love you all.
Oh, thank you, Sister Nikki. That's awesome. That's awesome. So I like that, like we always want to find ourselves in the word and just always applying it to our lives. So that was question 2. Question number 3 says, what was Haman's response to the report about Mordecai's actions? What was Haman's response? What did he want done? So as Sister Bernie said, after those little gossipers came back, what did he want done? Sister Shirley, Stamrod.
Yes, so he was angry, and his anger turned to wrath. And he not only wanted to kill Mordecai, but he wanted to kill the whole Jewish nation. No.
Yep. So we'll touch on a topic after we do question number 4. We'll bring out another topic for discussion. Oh, I'm sorry, Brother Curtis.
Yeah, we could see a repeat here. I believe that's devil inspired, because the same thing happened with Hitler when he tried to annihilate the Jews. And the same thing happened here with Haman. He wanted to annihilate the Jews also. And you can see anti-Semitism that's working today, actually with the Arab nations. And they have the ideology that they're going to drive the Jews from the river into the sea. So you see the same spirit keeps rising up again and again to destroy God's people, but it never works.
Yep, that's exactly right. Sister Gail?
I see it, well, on the way I see it is that Haman finally looked and said, here's my chance to pay back what the Jews did to my people. They killed all of my people. That was God told them to do it. So now here's my chance to get rid of all of them.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that. So we basically already answered question 4, but we're going to get Pastor Brandon.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to question 2 for a second. With when you asked what was the I forgot what the question was. Oh, how do we see God's providence in the promotion? And I just wanted to just say, like I had mentioned on Sunday about President Trump and Biden, and it's a lot of tightness with that situation, in politics, and everybody's fighting and frustrated when it comes up. But it just shows God's providence, because if you look at Esther chapter 2, verse 21 through 23, there was the 2 men that wanted to have the king killed, and it was Mordecai that actually gave word to the king. And then when you get to chapter 3, it tells us Haman's promoted. So it looks like Mordecai should have been promoted, but actually Haman was promoted. So it looks like, if you look at it from our point of view, that for lack of a better term, God picked the wrong person, right? Which we know is crazy. But the point is that there was a purpose for Haman's promotion. And we obviously know the whole point of it was so God can get the glory. But I just wanted to say that there's a reason for promotion. There's a reason why God does everything. And even if it seems evil, or it seems like there's a time period where the wrong person's in place, it's always God's will. And the scripture to cross-reference that is Psalm 75, 6 through 7. I read it Sunday. But for promotion cometh neither from the east nor the west, nor from the south, but God is the judge. He putteth one down and setteth up another. So I just wanted to give the life application to that. Like, even what we see now in our politics, and we don't like to discuss it or talk about it, gets real tense. But the truth of it is, whoever God puts in position, it's for his ultimate glory and for his good, or our good. And that's it.
Yep. You're absolutely right, Pastor. And that's the thing, when we read Romans, it says pray for the powers that be, because they're ordained of God. Whether, we can't take one part of the Bible and say we don't believe that, but we have to be able to say, like, be adults and be able to say, okay, well, all powers that be are ordained of God, and just pray for who's ever in charge. But that's a great way to put it, to say, you could say the wrong man was put in charge, but God doesn't make any mistakes. And that's what we're getting to through this lesson. Brother Curtis.
Yeah, I like what Pastor B said, because yep, that's the will of God and that's the mind of God. And I just wanted to bring something that's similar to that. The same thing happened with King Nebuchadnezzar. And when Nebuchadnezzar got lifted up with pride, then God brought him down to eat the grass with the oxen. And in the end, God told him that you would know that the God of this world picks up one and take it down another. So it's God that does the elevation in people and placing them in position, because the powers that be are ordained of God.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's exactly right. And we answered question 4. And then one thing that this brought out, this section here, where we talk about Haman's response to Mordecai's actions, is that he wanted to kill all the Jews. And, we bring out how the Jews are always persecuted, but also it talks about racism in a whole, that we judge. And this is a life application, how we put a stereotype, and for one person, doing something to us, we blame the whole race or the ethnicity, or, whatever the background is. If, like we say it like funny, like Italians talk with their hands, so we believe all Italians talk with their hands. Or, I'm trying to make light of it, because a lot of the issues with racism and stereotypes can be very serious. And we see that, here with the Jewish people, they have been persecuted for a long time. Anti-Semitism, it is nothing new, and they're going through it. You see the temples and everything are always, written on and just destroyed with graffiti. And it's just sad. Even in the Catholic Church, they knock down the statues and whatever it might be, even going to cemeteries and degrading that. I mean, it's just, people just have no thought of another human being. We just have to get back to, praying really for our nation and for the powers that be, as we keep talking about them. So, Brother Curtis.
Yeah, Sister Annalisa, just like you're saying now, it's prevalent right now. Anti-Semitism, you see it all over college campuses. You see it with these people that are going along with the Palestinians. You see Jews in synagogues being defaced in their writing, or putting swastikas everywhere. The Jewish nation right now is heavily under attack, not only in America, but in some of these other nations. It's just a rampage that's going on now about the Jewish nations, along with Hamas that's trying to wipe out the Jewish nation. It's right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it is. It's all happening. Nothing new under the sun. Everything that we read in the Bible, we can, see it happening today. So question number 5 said, what initial exchange took place between Mordecai and Esther after Haman's decree had gone out? So question number 5 from your book, what exchange took place? Sister Jolene.
Well, Haman was very distressed, and he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city and wept and cried and made it known to all the people. And then when Esther's maids and eunuchs told her what he was doing, she too was distressed.
Very good. Yep, very good. So that basically lets us know, and that eunuch was Hatach. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. Hatach. And as Sister Bernie brought out before about all the different men that ran back and told the bad news, Hatach was he was a trusted advisor. He was a trusted royal servant, the Bible says. And he was able to, go back and forth between Mordecai and Esther and deliver these messages. And it was, delivered with accuracy. We were able to see that what was being told back and forth, it was actually, it was told the right way. So why do you think, well, I think we already touched on this, so we won't ask this question. We will go on to questions 6 and 7. Then Esther told Hatak to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come unto him for 30 days. So Hatak gave Esther's message to Mordecai. So what did Esther remind Mordecai about after hearing his plan? So we just read it there. Question number 6. Sister Linda.
She was reminding him that you couldn't just go into the king without being summoned because it could cause her life. And so she was just trying to tell Mordecai that, she would be taking a risk in doing what he was asking her to do.
That's right. And then Sister Alma.
She had also reminded him that at first he told her to hide her ethnicity as being a Jew. And so now you got to go and she has to go in there and plead with the king to save her nation.
So why do you think, it doesn't bring out why Mordecai wanted Esther to hide her ethnicity, being a Jew. Why do you think that was the case? I mean, it's like we keep saying it was all in God's plan, but I mean, it would just be speculation, anything that we would think about that. But it is definitely, as we go through this, it's definitely a faith walk. And she had direct access to the king, and no other Jew did at that time. So it's definitely, you could see God's plan in this is so unbelievable. It's amazing, like how he put everything in order and put all the right people at the right place, as Pastor B said. Sister Vicky.
I just wanted to kind of answer the question you were asking.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I feel like it was all just like divine wisdom. Like I feel like to a certain extent, like Mordecai was advising Esther, like just hold off on that. Because I think if the king would have known from the beginning, and correct me if I'm getting my facts wrong, but if the king would have known in advance without going into next week's lesson, then it could have been like, oh, okay, like it would have been more like believable, like, yeah, that's why he did it. He knew she was a Jew, that's why he had favor towards her. But I think it really was like a step of faith, like this whole book kind of talks about, like how far are you willing to put your faith in God to be able to trust in his plan for you and for the people.
Excellent. That's excellent. Sister Cherie?
I was just kind of thinking that Mordecai didn't want her to reveal that she was a Jew as a mean of protecting her. I don't think that the Jews was really thought of too favorably. And I don't think if they knew, this is just personal, if they knew that she was a Jew, that she would have ever been even brought to or thought to be in the position of a queen. And I think it was divine protection of her also by Mordecai.
Yes, definitely. Sister Titi?
I agree with everybody was saying, but I look at us too as, from our perspective way too, if God gave us everything that we wanted, you know what I'm saying? We have to faith this thing. He gives us pieces by pieces, step by step. And it also developed faith within ourselves as well. Because if we get everything that we want, that's not showing faith, character, and all that other stuff, integrity, and all that stuff that we have. But he takes us through a process, even though he knows what it's going to be at, like it's going to in the end. Like we know other students going to get caught up. We know we're going to get this and get that blessing and get that one. But he takes us through it as a faith process from like glory to glory, realm to realm, and strength to strength.
Yep. That's excellent. That's a great point to make. We have to just go step by step. Like you said, we can't rush things. It's all in God's timing. So question number 7 is right out of verse 11. And we basically touched on this before. I think it was Sister Angel talked about this earlier when we were talking about it was 30 days that she hadn't even seen the king yet. So why was Esther so uncertain how the king would receive her? I just basically gave the answer. So if somebody wants to, chime in that we haven't heard from, and you want to, and if you want to still share, that's fine. Why was Esther so uncertain how the king would receive her? What was a hint that he might not receive her? And was Esther being a little paranoid here? What are your thoughts on that? Sister Jolene?
Well, she told Mordecai she had not been summoned by him for 30 days.
And she was worried about that. So she kind of thought about that in her own, a little paranoia, Sister Angela McFarland.
After 30 days, I think she probably felt like she was out of favor with him. So she was risking her life because she didn't know his mindset. It had been so long.
Right. Elder Leroy?
Also, she knew what happened to Vashti. That king is very unpredictable, and anything could happen. So I think the step she was taking was risky, as well as knowing that she did everything to prepare herself, prayed and fasted, and leave the outcome to God. What would happen.
You're right. We forgot we had Vashti as an example. Sister Titi?
I like what Sister Angela McFarland said it, because when she said it, it was like disfavor from God. But I also look at it as, along with that, as disfavor, she thought, and also fear.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why they fasted. And I thank God that's why she was able to come before him boldly, because he removed all that from her once she had them all fast for 3 days. That's just my opinion.
Yep. That's a great point to bring out. So questions 8 and 9, we're talking about Mordecai's challenge. And Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just a time as this? What a powerful couple verses. What did Mordecai suggest was the purpose of Esther's royal position? Question number 8. What did he suggest was the purpose of her position, her royal position? Sister Gail?
That she was put there just for that purpose.
Right? Sister Sheree?
Yeah, she was put there for to save not just herself, her family, but a whole nation, basically. And I almost looked at it like Jesus, his purpose. He was born and he died just to redeem us back to the Father. So she had a similar. She was saving a whole people, a whole nation.
That's right. She was put there. How do we know? And we won't jump ahead, but we know she put her faith in God, and Mordecai was, nudged. Sometimes you need someone to help you with your faith. Sometimes we might believe someone else for their healing, but then when sickness hits us, we're not as confident. We don't have that much faith. So sometimes you need someone to come along and say, hey, have faith. If God did it for this one, he could do it for you. So Mordecai was just, letting his faith go on Esther. If you don't do it, God will raise someone else up to do it. And that's the truth. That's the truth. So question number 9 says, why was Mordecai so certain that God would not allow the Jews to be annihilated? Why was he so certain? Question number 9. He was so certain that God would not allow the Jews to be annihilated. Sister Gail?
Because he knew that they were God's people, and God had made a lot of promises to them about how they were going to be, and further on down the line and all. And God is a promise keeper, and no matter what comes against them, he wouldn't back up on his promise. His word was out there, so he had to do it.
That's right. That's his covenant, and God will always keep his covenant promise, as you said. Definitely, God is not a liar. So now we're talking about Esther's determination. And this is where we stop so abruptly, and then we'll pick it up next week. But Esther's determination. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So what was Esther's plan to do? To sum all this up, what was her plan? Who can sum up what Esther's plan was? Question number 10. So Hatak took the message back to Mordecai, and Sister Shirley Stamrod.
So Esther was determined that she was going to fast and for 3 days, her and her maids, and then they were going to go in to see the king, and no matter what the outcome was, she was determined to go in to see the king, to speak with the king.
Yep, that's right. Sister Cherie, you want to add anything?
I just wanted to add, as Sister TT was saying, there's a part that fasting played in this, and we know that when we fast, we kind of kill the flesh. So as she was fasting and praying before the Lord, she was killing her flesh, and she was basically getting the mind of God. God was giving her the strategy, as we see in the next week's lesson, of what to do, how to do it. But it took her fasting to kill that flesh, to get the mindset of God to what she should do. So he was giving her strategic planning on what to do.
Yep. Sister Alma?
Also in my reading, it said that Esther had compared herself inadequate. She thought she was inadequate, mostly like Moses and like Gideon and like Isaiah. And another thing, it said that she also had gifts of compassion, diplomacy, intercession, and discernment.
Wow. Wow, that's great. Mother Millie.
I was just thinking, Anna, of the missionaries that go to different countries and lay their life down just to preach the gospel of Jesus.
Yep. And Mother Millie, you bring us to our next point, our next slide. And this is where we're going to really, we can really think about what we would do in this position here. So this is a life application, and it talks about how Mordecai did not bow down, and putting it into using, as Mother Millie said, one of our missionaries in Eastern Europe during the days of communism. A pastor had been imprisoned and was being interrogated by the secret police. They wanted the names of other Christians so that they too could be arrested. When beating did not achieve the desired result, the pastor's tormentors brought in his teenage son and threatened to beat him to death if names were not divulged. The pastor could not bear to see this happen and told his son that he was going to tell the police whatever they wanted to know. The young man insisted that the father not cooperate. He was then beaten to death before his father's eyes. That Christian pastor and his young son, like Mordecai, stood on principle, and they paid the ultimate price for it. So this is where we see where not giving in, but it actually had a dire consequence. The young man lost his life. So the question is, what would you have done in this position? If you had to really put yourself in this position, would you have given up your son? This is tough. This is a tough situation here. What is anyone's thoughts? Could you put yourself in this position? And could you say you would let your faith take you this far? Would you give up your life or your child's life for what you believe in, to be a martyr? What would you think about this? Does anyone have any thoughts that you'd want to share? Of course, it would be personal and, what you could do for that. But this pastor lost his son being, believing. He didn't want to give up the other names of the Christians. He didn't want to give up anyone else to be arrested and put in the same situation as him. Sister Angel.
I think it's something where, I can't speak to what I would personally do. I would hope I would do the same. I think we would all hope that, but I think we can't do it in ourselves, but with God, all things are possible. And I think of different martyrs that have gone on before, and that's all they had, that's all they knew, was God, and they went through so much. So I would hope that I would give my life for Christ, but I know that it would be God in me. It wouldn't be me in my flesh.
Exactly. I love that, Sister Angel. And we'd want to believe we would do it because I really don't. I really don't know. I really have no idea what I would do in that situation. And I love that you said that. We'd like to believe we would. And I think that's most of our sentiments. Brother Curtis.
Yeah, I look at these action movies, and a lot of times it comes to the place where they're trying to get information from a father, and they have the gun pointed at the father, and the child is over there, or they have the gun to the child's head, and the father's watching it. And the father has to make a decision whether he's going to give them the information or they're going to blow the head off of the child. And in these movies, most of the time, they give up the information because they don't want to see their precious child get harmed. I'm thinking in Christianity, that God, if that would happen, that God would prepare your heart for a situation like that. God will have you grow in grace and to grow in faith. So when you come to that particular situation there, that you have already been prepared by God, and not only prepared by God to go into that situation, like I said to Esther, you have, you come to the kingdom for such a time as this, but God will have taken you and placed you in that position and gave your heart peace to know that it is his will. And I think that it's a work of grace, that God has to bring you to that position. You'll be prepared for it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also like talking about pride, as you know, it's been preached about pride, and Haman was a man filled with pride, and he just wanted people to bow down before him, as we learned in this lesson. And then we'll see what happens with Haman next week. But it's definitely pride will bring a person down. And you think about like even like wanting, like the mafia, when somebody owes them money, the mafia, just like as we see in the movies, and they threaten to kill the person, and 99% of the time they kill that person. But now it seems so silly on the outside because you're definitely not going to get your money now. You killed the person. But sometimes it's not even about the money or what you get. It's about the pride. It's about someone else turning around and saying, oh, they mean business. They're someone you don't want to mess with. And that's even with the king. He got that reputation as well. So a lot of times it's not about, the actual deed of it, but it's about how am I going to look in this situation and how does it make me look? So here is another story real quick. Martin Luther, the great reformer, stood before the Diet of Worms in 1521. He was ordered to retract certain statements that he had issued. He had been assured safe conduct when he testified. However, it was understood that he would be apprehended and punished as soon as he returned home. And he knew of this danger. So Martin Luther believed in the absolute authority of Scripture. He believed that positions he had taken were scripturally sound. He therefore knew that he could not compromise. He challenged his accusers to prove him wrong from the Bible. Unless they could do so, he would not recant. So Queen Esther knew the risk she was taking by interceding for her people before the king. She was willing to take those risks. Doing what is right is even more important than life. So what have you lost for standing on your godly principles? Think about that for a minute. You don't have to answer that. You can actually just think about that. Has it been a job where maybe you didn't go to the company Christmas party where everyone's going to drink or get drunk, or a lot of companies do happy hours. I don't know if they still do that, but back in the day, they used to have happy hours. And if you didn't go, you were frowned upon and you weren't a team player. And so these types of things, like, have you really stood on, or if you're at a party or you're at the Christmas party, which that's not a sin going to the Christmas party. It's how do you conduct yourself? Did you feel pressure to take that drink? Did you open that door? Because sometimes you open those doors, they're hard to close. And, you just let that devil in just a little bit, and it's not good for us. It's not good for us. Or did we show them, we say we're a Christian all year long, but at the Christmas party, we're dancing and doing all the latest dances. So what have you lost for standing on your godly principles? And it goes back to the same question we started off with. How far will you let your faith take you? We have faith, and we don't want anyone to take that faith from us. And learning from the missionary and learning from Martin Luther, you know, he was punished, but he was standing on, he was not going to recant what he stood up for. If it's in the Bible, he stood up for it. And that was that. So preparing for next week's lesson, we're going to continue on with Esther and the deliverance of the Jews. Really study and read that and come back with your questions and your points. We'd love to hear from you. So if nothing else, we will close out tonight. Oh, Elder Dancy, please share, Elder Dancy.
Hi, Sister Annalisa.
Hi.
I didn't want the lesson to end without acknowledging you acknowledging my birthday and the comments that were made by Sister Nikki. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and we're gonna see this thing through to the end, right?
We are, Elder.
Okay. God bless.
God bless. Love you, Elder Dancy.
Love you too.
All right. May the Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. Love you all. See you on Friday night. Have a good